This is the freedom paradox. In the words of Carl Gustav Jung, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. It's very powerful. You have to think about that for a second. And the following piece will sort of explain that. So, how many ideas exist? Many upon many to be sure, but only one exists which possesses people in order to create an ultimate purpose, therefore meaning, and finally happiness, and that is freedom. There are two ways to approach freedom, two polarities, two defining counter-opposites which place freedom at the axiomatic center of a paradox. One so mysterious and painful, yet the only one by which we can strive for an infinitely faraway paradise. Freedom as a starting point, and freedom as the goal. We can take America, the New World, as an example of how an entirely cultural manifestation of freedom, as the starting point, was created by the incubation of the European Old World, whose perspective on achieving purpose has always been to fight for freedom, whatever freedom had ever been defined to be in those eras. One of the examples I use is the freedom to, or the idea of freeing the soul during the Dark Ages of the Roman Catholic Empire, for example, right? So, freedom, if we define it to be what allows us to discover and live our lives the way we were meant to, it's always been out of reach for the human race until we came to the New World with the idea that we were free to build whatever is necessary to buy ourselves all the time we need in order to live free, only to discover the ironic truth about freedom itself, which is free to do what? For lack of an answer to this question, we became recursive with the mantra, free to remain free. Hence why we imprisoned ourselves with the one thing we were striving never to have to do, which is to work. We can say that to be the quintessential hidden identity behind capitalism then. So, Europeans, they can be understood in their conflicted sort of hatred for America, as it stands on the other side of the puddle, seeing how the other perspective of freedom, which they so strongly desire for themselves, is being taken to its absurd conclusion and proves that there is no way out of the paradox. And so to what can they turn? Back to the utopian idealism of the 20th century, fighting for freedom as usual by killing those who believe in freedom as the starting point? What a horribly, absurdly absurd bind for a culture to find itself drowning in, right? Ideas shape. It should be remarked with fascination how an idea changes how people live, how they behave, and how they talk. Think of the stereotypical American. All Europeans sort of recognize them the moment they open their mouths, right? They're belligerently loud, precisely because the idea has shaped them to be that way. America the Free stipulates that you must be free to do what? To compete for freedom. And for that, you must be loud, fast, strong of character, and ruthless. This is a stark contrast to the subtlety and sophistication of the European, whose perpetual fight for freedom demands people to be cooperative rather than competitive, in order to fight a common enemy. And such enemies are fascinatingly fractionated. The Italians with their historical warring states, the Germans with their tribal kingdoms, the Spanish with their endless civil wars, the French with their wealth class revolutions. Such turmoil gets very old for a freshly landed free man in the old world. The irony to be seen from my perspective as a self-admitted misfit of misfits, I'm from Canada, which is somewhat a middle ground between both worlds, is that many in Europe do not consciously realize that they think they can handle the problem better than we can in the West, which is free to do what, right? Such a paradox demands balance, if anything, to even understand it to be a paradox. I would so much have liked to call it a problem, but decided against it by personal experience, that it is truly paradoxical. I was arrogantly humbled into admitting that I would be the most arrogant to state that it is a problem, so as to imply that I would have the ability to find its solution, and I can't. Returning to the question, my answer must be that we are free to find balance, what all wise men have stated for so many years, and so many wiser women have acted out. Therefore, We are continuously shaped by either the ignorance of balance or the desire for it. So let's look at some practical questions. All previous things being said, there is an obsession to be enjoyed in understanding the inner workings of such a paradox. If we are free to find balance, where then does that point of balance between two boundaries lie? How far apart should those boundaries be? Surely it's different for everyone and different over time for the individual. Those questions are reserved for our inner selves, and when applied, we come to need their application to those around us. If I conclude that I must be free to travel the world, then I necessarily have to negotiate with my society to allow me to do it, or fight it if it won't. We are walking engines of the freedom paradox, interacting with a complex multitude of freedom paradoxes across societal, psychological, physical, and economic dimensions. One then has to wonder if those dimensions can be understood or superimposed to achieve some sense of higher order, which could allow for the maximally nurturing environment for the balancing of freedom. This in itself creates a new question. Is balance just another fictional ideal? What if we peer into the future and imagine perfectly balanced societies, each with their perfectly balanced individuals? Don't we know this question to be useless anyway? One, because it's not strictly possible, and two, because even if it were, not desirable either. Now, we have come to the most stripped we can be of all weapons which guard against absurdity. And further still, we can ask, is that true? Are there not more questions which float around in the ether between us and the void? I've just demonstrated how the practical questions we can ask in order to obtain a sense of balance with our freedoms can quickly devolve into something much worse than a counterproductivity. So, here's my philosophical conclusion. Circling back to the beginning, I had chosen a specific order in which to describe the process we experience and where freedom fits into it, and that was purpose, meaning, and then happiness. We choose an ultimate purpose. I believe freedom is that ultimate purpose by which we establish two boundaries between which we find meaning. And if they are well set, such meaning can lead to happiness, we hope. The boundaries are you, which is the starting point, and the freedom you have chosen is the end point, either to discover yourself or fight for your ability to. That very mechanism is the ultimate purpose of freedom, which we strive for. And yet, it is a paradox because we have no way of defining anything in an absolute manner. You can define yourself through your struggle for freedom and leave freedom undefined, or you can define freedom to be the absence of struggle and then struggle to define who you really are. Both options leave you with very little meaning, either in the short term or the long term, depending on which kind of freedom you have chosen for yourself. Struggle for freedom your entire life, and you will find meaning in the short term, but look back at a past devoid of meaning. Struggle for meaning of who you are your entire life, and you will find meaning in a non-existing future while being tormented in every present moment. Now, I do not know which is better, nor which brings more happiness, only that it is a paradox. We are entities possessed by ideas, being shaped and shaping ourselves and each other while suspended and also imprisoned in the paradox of freedom, as we must choose between one of two polarities by which to strive for the point of balance, which, in the larger scale of infinitely regressive existence, doesn't exist. I'm not surprised by my extremism.